Welcome to another episode of Poetry for Progress, the podcast where we bring you the voices that matter, the poets who are shaping the world through their words. I'm your host, Mia Mattern, and today is a Meet the Poet episode, where we will dive into the thoughts and experiences of a young poet who has left an indelible mark on our community. Wang, a remarkable individual whose poetry has touched the hearts of many. He was previously recognized as a Poet of the Week on our Instagram page, and today we have the privilege of getting to know him on a more personal level. Evan is a first-generation American whose work has appeared or is forthcoming in The Journal, Rhino, Rust Plus Moth, and more. Evan works to create a facilitative literary hub in the American suburbs and is passionate about LGBTQ+ and AAPI representation in media. To close out that brief introduction, we have Evan reading his poem June Body. It is absolutely beautiful, and I cannot wait for you all to hear it. Here's June Body by Evan Wang.
June body, how to hold you forever. I lean into your thin mouth of summer, find nothing left to hate, everything to risk. Here I lavish, yards from goldenrods refusing this long year. Little flags perked up in a plot of grave made garden and human. A younger me trampled it, running happily past me. I couldn't stop him. How to slow the sledgehammer of history. I'm draped in light, taunting God, head Godward and lying. Look, I'm still here, half alive. So much breath and daydream before another burial shroud that is a mouth that is but a hell clasped, our bodies ashened.
That was a pleasure for all of our ears, I am sure, and that has led us to follow up with a few questions for Evan to get to know him and his work a little bit better. So, the first question is, you've performed your work at various venues, like Chinatown Friendship Arc and the Rotunda at the University of Pennsylvania. Is it important for you to share your work in this way?
Well, so much of what I do is to engage more people in poetry and to further its reach. And I think performing at different events such as that, you get access to so many different audiences. And I think performing poetry is just such a fun thing to do because written poetry and spoken word poetry have been around for centuries and centuries. It's a tradition. But I believe there's so much more potential to poetry in which poetry can engage and collaborate with different artistic disciplines. It can be with music, it can be with dance, it can be with so many things. And so many people see poetry as this one-dimensional thing that exists only on the page. But it's not always Shakespeare and it's not always Whitman, you know? So I think the more we show up, the more we put ourselves out there and perform at these festivals and events, we show young writers that there is so much more possibilities to poetry than they think. And it shows them where they can take their poetry to if they start writing.
Absolutely. Poetry in itself is such a dynamic art, so I appreciate your perspective on the multifaceted nature of the art. Our second question for you is each poet's writing process is distinct. How do you begin your writing process, and what leads you to write the poems that you do?
My writing process has changed a lot over the last few years, but I think my process now involves a lot of observing because I think everyone can be a poet if they train their poet's eye enough so they like whatever they see, they understand why they see it. Like the other day, I was walking home from school and it was around Halloween season. So there were these ghost decorations hanging from a tree, and I looked at that. I'm like, you know what? Ghosts hanging from a tree. That's a visceral image right there. So like that would inspire me if I kept that line in my heart. And then also like I saw because I live in the suburbs, so I saw this snake that was run over in the middle of the road. I'm like, well, that's an image, that's an observation, and you have to think about why did I realize that? Like why did I see that? Um, so I feel like that's usually how I begin my poems, but also, of course, reading a lot. Reading helps you do so much. You know, reading other poems, you understand what you like about poetry, what is doing well in a poem. And typically, that energy, that spirit, you use that to write your own poem. And that's how my current process is.
That's so interesting, and I'm so happy to hear that your inspiration comes from everywhere and just the tiny aspects of life or just the small things that you're noticing. I think that's such a big part of not only writing, but just living. And, poetry is, writing in a form of life, of giving life and of experiencing life very fully. Um, I also find it so interesting that you mention the black snake, or maybe you didn't specify, maybe not the black snake, but it just reminds me of the Mary Oliver poem, The Black Snake. And I've been thinking about that a lot recently because I live in a very rural area and I see a lot of roadkill. And I constantly think about that poem every time I see the roadkill. So I just connected so much with your idea of, finding inspiration in that tiny, well, not even tiny. It's hard to think of it as tiny. It's a full death, Seeing death in any capacity has to be moving or, emotional in some way. But I find it so interesting that you mentioned that because I've been thinking about it so much recently. And it's such an interesting visual form of motivation to write. The next question I have for you is, what have you learned so far from your title as the inaugural Montgomery County Youth Poet Laureate?
I have learned a lot as the Youth Poet Laureate of Montgomery County, and especially as the first one, I think everyone here is learning. But the biggest thing that I've learned was the programs at the libraries. When I did my countywide library tour, it was like so world changing to see all of the hardworking librarians behind the programs. Like they are organizing it, they are making the flyers, they are doing the promo. It is just so much work, and it's so inspiring and encouraging to see them do so much when like they put forth so much effort for little to no turnout most of the time. And so I think we really need to support our local libraries and go to their programs and events because they try so hard to bring kids and teenagers into the library to read, to engage. And they offer so many resources and opportunities. So I think it's great to support local libraries. Um, but also because another thing I learned was because I am the youth poet laureate of the suburbs. For many, many years before the program, there has been little to no poetry activity, especially for young people. And so when I went to these events and libraries and reading series and organizations, it's great to see so many teen writers and to see that there is still a spirit of poetry here. And the biggest thing I've learned is organization, and also just to see that there is a possible community to be forged here for future writers, and that I am glad to see.
Absolutely. I'm so passionate about local library support. So I absolutely love the appreciation of the librarians that you worked with. They truly have so much love for their community, despite the little recognition they get. And there's something about that that's so hopeful and so motivating. I just absolutely 100% support your local library. The next question relating to that is, how do you plan to continue with poetry once your time as Youth Poet Laureate ends?
I think even when my tenure as Youth Poet Laureate ends, I will still be a Youth Poet Laureate in spirit. Because in my school, I know like I'm the only writer and or the only person who takes writing seriously to this level, and I'm the only few in the county that does. So I've obviously experienced great success as the Youth Poet Laureate and other publications, and as a result, many teen writers from other school districts have reached out to me asking me for advice, etc., etc. And I would love to continue supporting them, and I would love to continue like telling them where to get published, where to submit to different opportunities for young writers, because that's why I do so much, so I can learn of these opportunities, so I can offer them to other young writers, so I don't have to, or so they don't have to struggle like I did when I first started writing. Um, but yeah, I feel like I will continue to champion teen writing after my tenure ends, and I hope to put out a chapbook, which is like a short collection of poetry. That is the goal.
That's amazing. I love that your goal is centered around helping others in your situation and just pushing for youth writers all the way. And that's so important because as you said, especially, within where you are and what you're working through, there is so few people doing what you're doing. So anyone that is passionate about it needs that push. They need that assistance. They need someone else who has already been there, who has already succeeded to the degree that you have, to tell them that it's possible. So I absolutely love that your goals are centered around just helping other writers. That's incredible. Lastly, sort of relating to the last question, but taking a broader look at your goals in general, what do you want to accomplish with your work in the long run?
Yeah, I think there is so much I want to accomplish with my work, but like I just said, I definitely want to put out a chapbook and definitely one day a full collection if I have that much creativity within me and if I can do that. Um, but like I said, I really want to broaden poetry's reach. So I would love to have a spoken word album that's like fully produced with instrumentals and music, and it can be just like it can be another experience that's not traditionally poetry. But of course, I would love to get better at writing poetry, and no one really knows what get better means. But in my definition of it is to feel more satisfied with poetry, as in I can get closer to what I'm trying to say in its rawest form. Um, and that's the goal. And I hope I will continue reaching new heights, putting together different projects, and helping other young writers, and most definitely inspiring them. My goal is to have a young writer in the future say, "Oh, Evan Wang's poetry inspired me. That's why I started to write."
Thank you for sharing that with us, and thank you for joining us today. We're so happy to have gotten you on this episode, and we're so lucky to have gotten to hear a little bit more about you. If you would like to know more about Evan Wang or support him in any way, his Instagram as well as his website will be linked in the description, as well as the Poetry for Progress Instagram and website. Please check it out. Thank you for joining us, and I hope that you will join us on our next episode because this episode has just gotten me so excited to work with so many talented, beautiful writers, and it's just such a pleasure. Thanks again. See you next time.